my shoes. They're silver.
In 1900, a children's fairy tale was published in the United States. It promised wonder, simplicity, and escape. A story meant for young readers, filled with witches, talking animals, and a road paved in gold. But as the years passed, something unusual began to surface. Scholars noticed patterns that felt deliberate, characters that resembled social archetypes, colors that echoed economic anxieties, a journey that mirrored the emotional and political uncertainty of an entire nation at the turn of the century. This was not folklore passed down for centuries. It was written by a journalist during one of the most turbulent periods in American history. So the mystery is not whether The Wizard of Oz contains deeper meaning. The mystery is why a story so widely known has been so narrowly understood, and what disappears when we stop reading it as a fairy tale. At the dawn of the 20th century, the United States was redefining itself. Railroads stretched across the plains. Cities expanded. Old certainties were giving way to new anxieties. It was in this moment, Chicago, 1900, that The Wonderful Wizard of Oz first appeared in print. At face value, it was a children's story, a girl from rural Kansas, a storm, a strange land reached by accident. Yet the book did not fade with time. Instead, it endured, quietly reshaped, retold, and reinterpreted by each generation that followed. Nearly 4 decades later, in 1939, the story returned in a different form. Produced by MGM in Hollywood, The Wizard of Oz arrived during the final years of the Great Depression, on the eve of global war. Black and white gave way to color. Fantasy replaced uncertainty, at least on the surface. The film would become one of the most recognizable works in American cinema, fixing its images in the cultural memory. But popularity did not end the questions. It intensified them. For over a century, scholars have continued to return to this story, not as entertainment alone, but as a text shaped by its time. In universities, it appears in political science courses, examined for its possible reflections of economic debates at the turn of the century. In psychology, it is discussed as a narrative of identity, fear, and self-perception. In economics and media studies, it is cited as an example of how stories absorb and transmit cultural values without ever stating them outright. These interpretations are not recent inventions. Academic discussions surrounding the symbolism of The Wizard of Oz began as early as the 1910s and expanded significantly throughout the 20th century. Articles, lectures, and peer-reviewed studies have revisited the text again and again, each uncovering new layers shaped by historical context rather than hidden intent. It is important to be precise here. This is not a story of secret codes or concealed agendas. There is no evidence of a single definitive message waiting to be uncovered. What exists instead is something more subtle and more enduring. The Wizard of Oz sits at the crossroads of myth and modern history, a story written at a moment of transition, adapted during another, and remembered long after both had passed. To understand why it continues to invite interpretation, we must move carefully, back to its origins, its world, and the era that shaped its path forward. To understand what followed, we begin with what is firmly documented. In the year 1900 in Chicago, Illinois, a book titled The Wonderful Wizard of Oz was published by the George M. Hill Company. Its author was Lyman Frank Baum, known publicly as L. Frank Baum, a man whose career placed him at the crossroads of storytelling, journalism, and public commentary. Baum was not an academic, nor a folklorist in the European tradition. He was a newspaper editor, a playwright, a businessman who had experienced repeated financial failure, and at various points in his life, a commentator on the social and political currents of his time. The America Baum was writing in had not yet settled into the century ahead. The Civil War was only a generation in the past. The country was still grappling with economic instability, marked by recurring financial panics and deep divides between urban industry and rural life. Factories were multiplying. Railroads were expanding. Cities were growing faster than their institutions could adapt. Alongside this rapid industrialization, new political movements were emerging, particularly those concerned with labor, currency, and representation. Public debate was intense, often emotional, and widely covered in newspapers, the same newspapers Baum once edited. Against this backdrop, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz entered the world not as a moral fable or ancient myth, but as something deliberately new. Baum described his book as a modernized fairy tale, one designed for American children, free, as he put it, from the heartaches and nightmares of older European folklore. This distinction matters. Traditional fairy tales often relied on inherited monarchy, ancient curses, or divine fate. Baum's story did not. Its heroes were ordinary, its villains were bureaucratic rather than mythical. Its magic, while present, was often exposed as fragile or conditional. The setting itself reflected this departure. Kansas, flat and colorless, stood in contrast to the imagined land of Oz. Not a medieval kingdom, but a constructed world with systems, rules, and authority figures that could be questioned. The book was an immediate success. Sequels followed. Stage adaptations appeared within a few years. By the early 20th century, Oz had become a familiar name in American households. Then, nearly 4 decades later, the story changed again. In 1939, The Wizard of Oz was released as a feature film by Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, produced in Hollywood, California. The timing was significant. The United States was emerging from the Great Depression. Economic recovery was uneven. Uncertainty still lingered, both at home and abroad. The film introduced a now famous visual decision. Kansas was shown in muted tones. Oz appeared in vibrant color. This was not a technical necessity. It was a creative choice, one that framed the story as a passage between worlds, between reality and imagination, hardship and hope. Historians and film scholars generally agree that this contrast was deliberate, though its meaning remains open to interpretation. What is clear is that the film fixed certain images: Dorothy, the yellow brick road, the wizard himself, into global cultural memory. From that point on, The Wizard of Oz was no longer just a book. It became a reference point, a shared narrative, revisited during moments of uncertainty and change. These facts are not disputed. The dates, the places, the publications, and the adaptations are well documented. What remains is not a question of whether the story mattered, but why it continued to resonate long after the world that produced it had transformed. And it is in that persistence that the more difficult questions begin to emerge. Yet even with the historical record firmly in place, important gaps remain. Lyman Frank Baum left behind no single explanation for what the wonderful Wizard of Oz was meant to represent. In his lifetime spanning from 1856 to 1919, he published editorials, letters, and essays, many of them written during his years in South Dakota, Chicago, and later California. They reveal a man engaged with the issues of his era, but rarely in precise terms. His political opinions, when they appear at all, are often indirect, observational rather than declarative, suggestive but unresolved. At no point did Baum write a definitive statement explaining Oz as an allegory, economic, psychological, or otherwise. This absence is notable, especially given how carefully the story itself unfolds. The narrative follows a clear sequence. Dorothy begins in rural Kansas, a place defined by flatness, repetition, and uncertainty. She is carried without intention or control into Oz, where power appears organized, color-coded, and absolute. Each encounter seems purposeful. Each figure claims authority. And yet, as the journey progresses, certainty gives way to contradiction. But here too the record becomes unclear. When The Wizard of Oz was adapted for film in 1939, key elements were changed or removed entirely. In Baum's original text, Dorothy's shoes are silver. In the film, they are ruby, altered in part to showcase emerging color technology. Entire scenes were rewritten or abandoned. Political dialogue was softened. Ambiguity was streamlined into sentiment. These changes complicate interpretation. They blur the line between authorial intent and later creative decisions. What belonged to Baum's world in 1900 and what belonged to Hollywood in 1939 is not always easy to separate. As a result, scholars continue to debate a central question. Was the symbolism, if it exists, deliberate, planned consciously by a writer responding to the pressures of his time, or was it subconscious, the product of a mind shaped by social and economic forces, expressed without clear intention? There is also another possibility. That meaning was assigned later. that readers, living through new crises, returned to the story and found reflections of their own concerns embedded within it. None of these interpretations can be proven conclusively, and that uncertainty is part of what keeps the story alive. The Wizard of Oz offers just enough structure to invite analysis and just enough silence to resist closure. What it withholds may be as important as what it reveals. And it is within these missing pieces, these unanswered questions, that the story begins to open itself to interpretation. With the historical record established, interpretation begins where certainty ends. Over time, scholars have proposed several ways of reading The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. Not as hidden messages to be decoded, but as reflections shaped by the world in which the story was written and later remembered. These interpretations do not claim final authority. They remain possibilities, debated and revised across generations. The first of these gained prominence in 1964, when historian Henry Littlefield published an essay suggesting that the story could be read as a political allegory of the United States at the turn of the 20th century. Viewed through this lens, the narrative unfolds with deliberate familiarity. Dorothy begins her journey in Kansas, a rural landscape shaped by uncertainty and repetition. She is not powerful. She is not chosen by destiny. She is ordinary, representing, in this interpretation, the American citizen navigating forces beyond her control. The road she follows is yellow. In the late 19th century, gold dominated economic debate. The yellow brick road, according to this reading, may reflect the gold standard, prominent, structured, and restrictive. Dorothy's shoes, described in Baum's 1900 text as silver, have been interpreted as a reference to bimetallism, a once prominent proposal to stabilize the economy by valuing both gold and silver. At the center of Oz stands the wizard, powerful in appearance, commanding in voice, yet ultimately revealed as human, limited, and dependent on illusion. In this view, the wizard represents leadership sustained more by perception than substance. It is important to pause here. Littlefield's interpretation is influential, but not definitive. Many historians question whether Baum intended such precision. Others suggest the parallels are coincidental, shaped by hindsight rather than design. The theory remains debated, not settled. A second interpretation moves inward, away from politics and toward the mind. Early 20th century psychology was beginning to explore identity, fear, and self-perception. When the Wizard of Oz is viewed through this lens, Oz becomes less a place and more an inner landscape. The Scarecrow believes he lacks intelligence, despite repeatedly solving problems. The Tin Man fears he cannot feel, even as he shows compassion. The Cowardly Lion doubts his courage, though he acts bravely when it matters. Each figure represents a form of perceived absence, not an actual deficiency, but a belief shaped by fear. Dorothy's journey in this interpretation is not about escape, it is about integration. Moving through Oz allows each character, and Dorothy herself, to recognize what was already present. The wizard does not grant them new qualities. He names what they already possess. A third interpretation looks beyond individual psychology toward cultural myth. Unlike European fairy tales, Oz has no ancient royal lineage, no divine mandate, no inherited throne. Authority in Oz is unstable, temporary, and often questioned. In this reading, the Wizard of Oz functions as a distinctly American myth, a story where power is not granted by birth, but discovered through experience, where ordinary individuals, farm girls, laborers, outcasts, become agents of their own transformation. This reflects a broader cultural shift at the turn of the century, away from monarchy, away from fate, towards self-determination. None of these interpretations cancel the others. They overlap, contradict, and coexist. Each follows the same narrative path, Kansas to Oz, illusion to recognition, but arrives at different conclusions. And perhaps that is the story's most enduring feature. It allows meaning without insisting upon it, offering a journey that continues to change, depending on who is walking the road. As the journey through Oz continues, certain details begin to stand out, often overlooked, yet carefully placed. Color is one of the first signals. When Dorothy approaches the Emerald City, the landscape appears radiant, prosperous, almost unreal. In Baum's 1900 novel, Citizens are required to wear green-tinted glasses. The brilliance of the city is not entirely natural. It is perceived that way, suggesting prosperity as an experience shaped by belief rather than substance. Inside the city, the wizard never appears the same way twice. To Dorothy and her companions, he reveals himself in forms that command fear and authority. A wall of fire, a monstrous beast, a disembodied floating head. Each image is tailored to the observer, reinforcing the idea that power in Oz adapts to expectation. The journey eventually turns back toward Kansas. When Dorothy repeats the words, "There's no place like home," the phrase carries weight beyond location. It signals grounding, a return to identity rather than escape. Home is not framed as comfort alone, but as psychological stability. Some of the story's sharper edges were softened in 1939, when the film adaptation reshaped Baum's world. Political dialogue was reduced or removed. Consequences were made less severe. In the original text, choices carry lasting effects, especially for the figures who govern Oz. These omissions did not erase the symbols. They simply made them quieter. And in that quiet, much of the story's deeper texture faded from view. By the mid-20th century, the meaning of the Wizard of Oz had begun to settle into a single, familiar shape. The 1939 film, produced in Hollywood, became the definitive version of the story. Repeated broadcasts, especially in the years following World War II, fixed it in public memory as a reassurance rather than reflection. A tale of color, music, and return, understood primarily as fantasy. In adapting the story for a mass audience, Hollywood made deliberate choices. Ambiguity was reduced. Uncomfortable themes were softened. Complex motivations gave way to clarity and emotional resolution. This shift aligned with the cultural mood of the time. In the decades after the war, American audiences favored optimism and stability. Stories were expected to comfort, not unsettle. Oz, once a strange and uncertain place, became safe. Meanwhile, more layered interpretations continued elsewhere, in lecture halls and journals, in academic discussions that rarely crossed into popular culture. There is no evidence of coordinated suppression or deliberate erasure. What occurred was simpler and perhaps more enduring. A complex story was gradually streamlined, until its questions became background details and its deeper tensions faded from view. As the story moves toward its end, its relevance does not fade with time. Instead, it quietly adapts. More than a century after its publication in 1900, The Wizard of Oz continues to shape how audiences understand authority, identity, and belief, often without direct instruction. Like many enduring narratives, its influence lies not in what it explains, but in what it allows viewers to recognize for themselves. The wizard remains central to this reflection. In Oz, authority is theatrical. It is reinforced by spectacle, repetition, and distance. The wizard's power depends less on action than on perception, on how he is seen rather than what he does. In modern readings, this has led some scholars to view the wizard as a broader metaphor, not for any single force, but for systems of authority that rely on image, media that shapes consensus through presentation, institutions that function through ritual and trust, public figures whose influence is sustained by appearance rather than substance. These interpretations are not confined to one era. They persist because the mechanisms they describe remain familiar. The story also explains why adults return to narratives first encountered in childhood. Over time, meaning shifts. A story once understood as adventure becomes reflection. What seemed simple reveals complexity as personal and cultural contexts change. Oz functions as a mirror in this process. Each return reveals something different: the fears we recognize, the qualities we project onto others, the assumptions we make about where power resides, and who is entitled to wield it. In this way, the Wizard of Oz does not instruct, it reflects. And as long as societies continue to question authority, identity, and belief, the road into Oz remains open. The Wizard of Oz never tells us that the world is an illusion. It simply asks us who is holding the curtain and why we are so willing not to look. Perhaps the most unsettling possibility is not that the story hides a message, but that it has quietly asked the same question for over a century. If everything you are searching for was already within you, why did you need a wizard to believe it? And if you have followed the journey this far, through Kansas and Oz, through questions and symbols, perhaps you might consider sharing it. A like, a subscription, or passing the story along ensures that these questions, these reflections, continue to reach others.